Norman is a Romance language which can be classified as one of the oil languages along with Picard and Walloon. The name Norman French is sometimes used to describe not only the Norman language, but also the administrative languages of Anglo-Norman and Law French used in England. For the most part, the written forms of Norman and Modern French are intercomprehensible. Geographical distribution. Norman is spoken in mainland Normandy in France, where it has no official status but is classed as a regional language. It is taught in a few colleges near Cherbourg-Octeville. In the Channel Islands, the Norman language has developed separately, but not in isolation, to form what are recognized as Gerrier, Guernesiais, Guernsey French and Serkia. Gerrier and Guernesiais are recognized as regional languages by the British and Irish governments within the framework of the British-Irish Council. Serkia is in fact a descendant of the 16th century Gerrier used by the original colonists from Jersey who settled the then uninhabited island. The last first language speakers of Oraigne, the dialect of Norman spoken on Alderney, died during the 20th century, although some rememberers still exist. The dialect of Herm also lapsed at an unknown date. An isogloss termed the Joret line separates the northern and southern dialects of the Norman language. There are also dialectal differences between western and eastern dialects. 3 different standardized spellings are used: Continental Norman, Gerrier, and Guernesiais. These represent the different developments and particular literary histories of the varieties of Norman. Norman may therefore be described as a pluricentric language. The Anglo-Norman dialect of Norman was a language of administration in England following the Norman Conquest of England in 1066. This left a legacy of Law French in the language of English courts. In Ireland, Norman remains strongest in the area of southeast Ireland, where the Hiberno-Normans invaded in 1169. Norman is still in use for some very formal legal purposes in the UK, such as when the monarch gives royal assent to an Act of Parliament using the phrase "Le Reine le veut," wills it. The Norman conquest of southern Italy also brought the language to Sicily and the southern part of the Italian peninsula, where it has left a few traces in the Sicilian language. See Norman French and French influence on Sicilian literature in Norman ranges from early Anglo-Norman literature through the 19th century Norman literary renaissance to modern writers. Today, the Norman language is strongest in the less accessible areas of the former Duchy of Normandy, the Channel Islands and the Cotentin Peninsula in the west, and the Pays de Corks in the east. Ease of access from Paris and the popularity of the coastal resorts of central Normandy, such as Deauville, in the 19th century led to a significant loss of distinctive Norman culture in the central low-lying areas of Normandy. History. When Norse invaders from modern-day Denmark and Norway arrived in the then province of Neustria and settled the land that became known as Normandy, these Germanic-speaking people came to live among a local Romance-speaking population. In time, the communities converged so that Normandy continued to form the name of the region while the original Normans became assimilated by the Gallo-Romance people, adopting the speech. Later, when conquering England, the Norman rulers in England would eventually assimilate, thereby adopting the speech of the local English. However, in both cases, the elites contributed elements of their own language to the newly enriched languages that developed in the territories. In Normandy, the new Norman language inherited vocabulary from Old Norse. The influence on phonology is more disputed, although it is argued that the retention of aspirated p and k in Norman is due to Norse influence. Examples of Norman words of Norse origin. In some cases, Norse words adopted in Norman have been borrowed into French, and more recently some of the English words used in French can be traced back to Norman origins. Following the Norman conquest of England in 1066, the Norman language spoken by the new rulers of England left traces of specifically Norman words that can be distinguished from the equivalent lexical items in French. Other words such as captain, kennel, cattle and canvas introduced from Norman exemplify how Norman retained a k from Latin that was not retained in French. Norman immigrants to North America also introduced some Normanisms to Quebec French and the French language in Canada generally. Jodal, a working-class sociolect of Quebec in particular, exhibits a Norman influence. Some expressions that are currently in use in Canada are abria, y faux of bria, y fait fret. French abriter, a stir equals French maintenant. Barreau equals French bar. Bur equals French berceau. Bours equals French ridles du and chariot. Bluard equals French myrtille. Champellier, a variant form of Norman campeleurs, equals French robinet. Crotch equals French tour-du. Garnot equals French terreno ix. Gourgan equals French fives de marais. Gourgan equals French barguet de porc fumé. Gritcha for Norman grina equals French grimacer asterisk graphigna4 asterisk graphina4. Greagrilla for Ichito eyesight for Ito for Duque a Duque for asterisk. Mitan for Margu for Margana for Magna for Pigoche for Pogni for Pomonic for Aracoin for Ramara for Ramucria for Mucaranza for Resudra for Sacrare for Vilan for Vlimu for Velo for Y for Zeus for